All right. So, on your star notes, that's the bright yellow sheet that everybody's got out. And if you don't have it for some reason, then just get out a piece of paper, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go, let's go. We don't have a lot of time. What? Come get it. Sun's effect on Earth. We talked about the positive effects a few days ago. We know that the number one big thing that the sun does for us is provide everything we need for life. Well, that's good, right? Without that, we wouldn't be here. The sun provides light, energy, and heat. We really know that all those three things come from the photons, right? The photons come from the sun to us. They help the Earth systems to be maintained, the biosphere, which is all of life, the hydrosphere, which is all of the water stuff. It drives the sun. It's weird. The sun drives the weather patterns. The sun drives the ocean currents. The sun drives the water cycle. Without the sun, we would be dead. I mean, it's the short version of it. Okay? So the sun's pretty awesome. Yay, sun. But wah, wah, as with everything, there's also some bad sides. This is what we talked about a little bit at the end of the week last week. Okay? The negative impacts. Negative. Let me try that again. Of the sun. What do you know about the sun that could be negative? What's bad about the sun? What can it do? What's that? I thought I heard somebody say something.
UV rays.
What?
UV rays.
UV rays! Those are bad, right? Indeed, UV rays cause cancer. That's not good. Okay? So ultraviolet rays can be harmful. What else? We could become too hot, right? Too much radiation. So thankfully, we've got the atmosphere, right, that helps to regulate that. Otherwise, we would get too hot and we would literally like be toast. Is that kind of what you're envisioning, right? What else? We spent 2 whole days talking about this, ladies and gentlemen. 2 whole days on the negative impact of the sun. Last Friday, we read lots of articles. We talked about lots of things. What was it? What's that? CMEs, yeah. What is a CME? Do you remember? Yeah. Coronal means that it's on the outside layer of the sun. Mass means some stuff is being thrown out of the sun, right? We know that CMEs are much more likely when we have lots of solar activity. Lots of solar activity means what kind of things do we have when we have solar activity besides CMEs? We looked at some pictures of the sun that had a lot of what's on them? Spots. Those spots on the sun are called? Look at you guys. And sometimes those sunspots develop into another thing, the things that kind of come off besides the CMEs. Starts with an F. Flares, yeah, solar flares. Okay. Those sunspots and solar flares, that solar activity and those CMEs lead to what? Lead to bad, yes. Lead to bad stuff. For example, what kind of bad stuff? What can those CMEs and those solar flares cause? Power outages? Is that what you're going to say? Oh, she stole it. Okay. What else? Yeah. Cell phone towers down, loss of communication all over. We'll say loss of communications networks. And there was one more, and we talked about it when we looked at this graph. You looked at this graph when you were looking at those pictures of the sunspots. We kind of looked at this. It was kind of the end of the period, though we didn't get really a chance to talk about it. So that's why I wanted to bring it up right now. Okay. This graph is kind of weird. Usually when you look at a graph, how many sides are labeled? 2. The HR diagram had all 4, so we're like, whoa. This one has how many labeled? 1, 2, 3. So the year is down on the bottom. That makes sense. That's our time. This one I think makes pretty good sense. The sunspot number, right? You can stare at a picture of the sun. Don't stare at the sun, but stare at a picture of the sun, and you can count up the number of sunspots. And then you can see, so this is, the sunspots are the like dotted line here. You can see that the number of sunspots kind of does what as time goes on?
Up and down.
It goes up and down and up and down, right? And if you look at this, like there's a peak at about 2000, there's a peak about 1990, there's a peak about 1980. So we have a peak about how often? Every 10 years. That is what we would call the frequency. This is kind of a wave, isn't it? Going back to unit 1, that's kind of a wave with a frequency of about 10 years. So that's interesting to notice that the sunspot and the sun activity is cyclical, okay, or goes up and down. This thing over here says satellites. Does anybody remember what satellites meant? Yeah.
Something that like orbits the Earth or the moon.
So the moon is a natural satellite, isn't it? Yep. So any object that orbits another object is called a satellite. These ones, we're not talking about necessarily natural satellites, more so man-made or human-made, I should say, satellites, right? Which allow for all of the communication that we do, right? All of the 24-hour news cycle, the fact that you can get Instagram pictures at anywhere on Earth, right? Like that kind of stuff is all due to satellites. So if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture, but there is, we'll talk about this another time, a kind of a shell, which is kind of weird to think about, of satellites that kind of surrounds the Earth all at about the same height so that they can be in what they call geosynchronous orbit. So they're staying at the same spot over the Earth, okay? Tons, thousands and thousands of these satellites are just up there all the time. Most of the time they work pretty well, but sometimes they fail. This graph is of satellites failing. Okay? This is a graph of satellites coming down. What do you notice? So this is like the little black dots, the black squares, diamonds. What do you notice about the black diamonds?
They're following almost the same pattern as the sun's.
They follow the same pattern, don't they? It's not perfect, but it's probably because we just don't have quite enough data. But they follow the sunspots pretty carefully. So what does that tell you about satellites and their ability to function when you have high solar activity?
They don't.
They don't, is the short answer. Does that make sense? Satellites are not as easily able to function when you have high solar activity. So yet another negative effect, okay, of all of this solar activity and all of these things that happen on the sun is that we have loss of satellite communication and network. How many of you have ever used GPS to find your way anywhere? Anybody? Yeah. That's all based on satellite, right? It's all satellite located, and then it tells you where to go based on that. Okay. So there are lots of good things about the sun, also a few bad things about the sun. Important to know. Questions?